Let's move on now to main topic number 3. And our third main topic today comes to us from Horatio G, who writes, "Hey, John. Okay. A little bit of a weird question because I'm writing this before Disney Plus launches, but let's pretend it already has, okay?" So clearly they wrote this yesterday sometime. "Wow, Mandalorian. What did you think about it? Did it meet your expectations?" All right. So, I mean, yeah, there's $1 million question. The show we have been waiting for. John Favreau promising to bring, the gritty Western to the Star Wars universe with a semi-familiar face in The Mandalorian, a bounty hunter escapades, a lone gunfighter in the universe and all that kind of stuff, a who's who of great all-star talent lineup to direct various episodes and all this kind of stuff. It drops last night. Rob, you had a chance to watch this last night, and they dropped it earlier than we thought, just like they dropped Disney Plus. Let me ask you, what did you think about the first episode of The Mandalorian?
Okay, I watched it twice, back to back. I liked it. I really liked it. I did not, however, love it. And I didn't love it, and I'll say why I didn't like this. I have been a big fan of Dave Filoni and what they've done with the animated Star Wars. I like the Clone Wars series, the second Clone Wars series, more than you did, I think, and I've really enjoyed how the animated universe has done a great job of expanding the Star Wars universe in its entirety. That said, and I felt this when I was watching all of the action scenes we saw in the trailer, I think this was Dave Filoni's first time directing live action. He directed this pilot episode. John Favreau wrote it. I felt the direction he was a first timer. And while I liked how the action was staged, I thought it was shot. I don't want to say anything about what the scenes were. I just thought that Dave Filoni, clearly, he's going to get his chops. It started out, it's very serviceable, but I felt, to equate it to something, I felt like I was seeing a movie like Star Trek 3, which was Leonard Nimoy's first time directing. And I thought that the episode suffered just from pacing issues. As a film editor myself, I would have edited it a little quicker. And there were things about The Mandalorian that the character that I loved, but then they would undercut him for a little bit of goofy humor that wasn't goofy enough. And I thought it really felt like an animated episode to me. And I really thought it was the shot choices and the way it was paced felt animated. And I think that'll change. I think the show, can't wait to see Friday's episode. I really thought it was really intriguing. I love the lore. I love the world building, even though I would like to have seen maybe headers, what planets they were on or where they were going sometimes. But as far as an entry to the Star Wars universe, I really enjoyed it. It's short. If it was a movie, it would only be the first 40 minutes of a movie. But I really thought it was intriguing, and as a first episode, it hooked me, and I really loved seeing the Star Wars universe portrayed this way.
Let me just say this up front. I quite enjoyed it. To be honest with you, I really did. Now, let me talk about some of the negatives first, just so I can get these out of the way, okay? Number one, it was jarring how short it was.
Right.
Because, somebody wrote to me saying, John, if you go from the end of the opening credits to the beginning of the end credits, it's about 36 or 37 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's just, I didn't know that because, when you hit play, you can see the time bar on the bottom, right? I wasn't looking at that.
Me neither.
I just assumed it was going to be an hour-long episode. And hey, make the length whatever length you feel you need to make it. That's cool. I'm just saying it was jarring to me because I was just expecting it to be longer. That's all. So when it ended, I was kind of like, oh, really? That's the end. I cannot agree with you more about the direction of it, though, because you said something to me off screen, which I thought was completely relevant, which was, John Favreau, who's the one who came up with this, he really should have directed the first episode to set that tone. And I think there would have been some improvements because you're absolutely right. You can tell this thing was being directed much like X-Men Days of Future Past, which I didn't think was as bad as a lot of people made it out to be. You're watching it, you said, yeah, this feels like a guy directing something for the first time. And while Dave Filoni has directed animation before, I'm watching it, it's like, yeah, it does feel like it's being directed by somebody who is directing on a live action environment for the first time. And that has some positives, it has some negatives. Whatever. There were a couple of creative choices. Again, we weren't going to spoilers here, but you're right. A couple of things where you set him up to be this great badass of the universe, and then you do a couple of things for a couple of yuck jokes that kind of undermine the character a little bit. But whatever, it's fine. So there was that. I thought also as well, you meet a lot of the trailers take place in the very first 3-minute scene of the show. Like the first 3-minute scene of the show, you've almost seen in its entirety already because they really highlighted them in the trailers. And without giving any spoilers away, he comes across his first bounty. Oh my God, that character was annoying. That was an annoying character. And I was really glad we didn't have to sit with him for very long.
He felt like a character out of an animated show.
He did. And I think that speaks to where it really did. It felt like a live-action Clint Eastwood Western, and then all of a sudden a very animated character was dropped in the middle of it. And it was a little out of place. There were a few other little nitpicks here and there, some pacing things, some whatever. But this is why I have been saying for years, do not give Dave Filoni a feature film until you give him some other stuff to cut his teeth on as far as live action stuff goes, whether it's a smaller movie or some episodes like this. And that's why I thought it was brilliant to have him direct some episodes of Mandalorian and why they're grooming him. I just, like you, Rob, I think they should have let Filoni direct they should have let Favreau direct the first one. With that out of the way, those are my nitpicks. All right. Those are my nitpicks. Particularly for a first episode, I thought this was quite strong for a first episode of a TV series. Because look, what's the thing the first episode's got to do? It's got to give you a sense of what is the world we're in, whether even if it's a regular television show. What's this world that this lawyer character is inhabiting? What's the world this galactic bounty hunter? So it gives you a sense of the world that you're in and gives you a sense of the people we're dealing with. And I thought on those two fronts, the first episode of Mandalorian did a very, very good job. I got a really good sense of, being on the outskirts of the universe, what this world, this post-Empire world was now like. I enjoyed that very much. I really did get a sense, despite those little gooby jokes they threw in there, I thought we were getting a real good sense of this Mandalorian bounty hunter is not one to be trifled with. And I got a little bit of sense of that, and they give you a little bit of glimpse of his background as well. Again, we won't go into any spoilers or anything like that. The action sequences were great. It felt, look, there's a lot of TV today that people say, ooh, this TV stuff is like movie quality, it feels cinematic. It's like, no, it's good TV, but this felt extremely cinematic. Like from the opening shot, it felt very, very cinematic. And I remember it made me feel like the way I felt when I watched the first episode of Rebels. When I watched the first episode of Rebels, I was like, this is the first time in a long time that I feel like a piece of Star Wars content took me into that galaxy far, far away. And that is something that the first episode of Mandalorian really needed to do. And I felt like it did that. It brought me there. It made it feel like Star Wars to me. You know what I'm saying?
Let me ask you a question. And this is something that I felt, especially seeing how it was cast. To me, I felt that what we just saw was a proof of concept for a show. That Favreau came in with this idea. Kathleen Kennedy said, okay, work with Filoni. And they shot this. This was a true pilot. Now, they did not have a green light to make this show. And this episode was showing how could you guys make a Star Wars show on a budget that wasn't huge. That's why we had interesting cast choices like Carl Weathers. It's not like these people had a lot of screen time. They cast really interesting people that probably didn't cost them a lot of money.
By the way, how great was Werner Herzog?
Oh, I loved him.
How great was Werner
Herzog? He's
Herzog?
done voices in animated shows, so I'm sure Favreau could call him up and could say, hey man, we are shooting a potential pilot for a Star Wars TV series. Who wouldn't come? And so this show felt like they were proving that they could make a live action Star Wars show that wasn't going to break the bank, that looked as good as a Star Wars movie. I mean, that's how my takeaway, and I expect that on Friday, I think the reason they're releasing 2 episodes in a week is because the next episode is going to say, okay, you guys like this little introduction to the idea and the world and where we're going. That worked. We thought it worked. You guys thought it worked. I think Friday's episode is going to be the one that goes, okay.
So you feel like this episode was the bait, the next episode's the hook?
Yes. That is exactly right. And I thought this was good, but I thought this was a proof of concept that we were watching that worked really, really well, because that's why Filoni, like, they let him direct, because look, if they were spending huge amounts of money, they would have demanded Favreau direct this.
And he will direct a lot of the
He
second
will direct,
seasons
but he
in this
oversaw it.
idea.
It was his idea. And Kathleen Kennedy said, work with Filoni. And Filoni probably storyboarded this like an animated episode, made it like an animated episode. That's why we had there's one particular scene when the Mandalorian's trying to do something.
Yeah.
That was a little goofy.
For those of you who've seen it, you know the scene he's talking about.
Right out of an
goofy,
animated show. I'm like, but that's what they did. Kathleen Kennedy wanted to make sure that these two guys could do what they said they were going to do. And she was smart, and they did, and that's why we have this show.
And it works again with all the nitpicks that we're going over. Bottom line is this thing works. By the way,
it's fun. You watch it,
and it's fun.
I'm only being nitpicky because I was thinking about it. I watched it twice, but didn't it put a smile on your face the whole time?
Oh yeah. Yeah, and again, it felt like it took me that world. By the way, quick little side note: we've mentioned Carl Weathers. It was a very small part in the first episode. Werner Herzog, small part in the first, but he was fantastic in it. The Nick Nolte character.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, while very awkwardly introduced, again, felt like an animated show, the way you did this character
totally
in a cartoon.
Yeah.
It really did. I still dug this character. And it was clearly the Nick Nolte voice. But there was one thing, he pulls a Yul Brynner from King and I, that instead of, so let it be written, so let it be done, his little thing is, the one line that he says in this thing, and again, I won't give any context, is, I have spoken. I want to make a t-shirt that just says, I have spoken. That's like the new catchphrase for everything. I have spoken. It was great.
There are two other things that I really loved. Of course, the animated show, The Clone Wars, developed the Mandalorian lore.
Right, yes.
This episode goes into that a little bit, which I was like, wow, that's awesome. But I have to say my MVP on this one was IG-11. I loved seeing an IG, an assassination droid, whatever.
Bounty droid.
The bounty droid, the way he walked, the way he moved. I mean, we saw little bits of that in the trailer, but I loved the way they portrayed. I mean, we've seen animated versions, but seeing a live action version of this character, I love the way Taika Waititi voiced him. I hope we get to. Well, it was just. I loved how that character was portrayed, and that was a lot of fun.
It was great, and I'll tell you what. I already knew what the ending of the episode was going into it, and again, we're not going to give anything away. I knew what it was before I started watching it.
But what does it mean?
And it still had good impact. Well, we can't talk about that. All I'm going to say is that the ending, even though I knew what was coming, it was like, that's really cool. Like, it just felt really good. My wife had no idea what the ending was, and she was just beaming. Like, Anne was just beaming when the end of the episode came.
Dude, that final shot
was great.
Got me. I was like a little verklempt.
So a lot of good stuff. A few stumbles, I think, here and there. Look, this is what I put up on my Twitter. I said, I like this first episode. I didn't think the first episode was fantastic, but it checked all the boxes for me about what a first episode needs to do. And it did it. And it had enough really good stuff in there that I'm like, yeah, I'm looking forward to Friday.
By the way, I have to say, there are other things in it I loved. Like, clearly, things that sort of gave it away to me that it's a pilot. A lot of the aliens, familiar Star Wars aliens.
Sure,
a lot of droids, familiar Star Wars droids. But what I really loved, we'd seen it in the pilot, is the design of his ship. Because it's redolent of the Republic attack. What are they? From Attack of the Clones, the Republic transports of the Republic. It
Cruisers,
had that cruisers. The front of them was kind of the same. I really dug it. I mean, the design, the look of the whole thing, it was very familiar. It was all, in terms of its design work, it was all fan service. It was all stuff we've seen before. It was an amalgamation of, what's that?
First time ever in any Star Wars, anytime, we see, what does a toilet look like in Star Wars? We get our first look at, it's like, I look at that. People in Star Wars use the bathroom, which I thought was kind of funny. Hey, listen, guys, just to let you guys know, we're not going into too many spoiler details. A little bit later this afternoon, of course, Christian Harloff and I have Dark Side, Light Side. That's going to be at 2 p.m. live this afternoon. We will be talking a lot about The Mandalorian and we will speak openly about spoilers as well. So if you haven't watched The Mandalorian yet, you might want to just watch the show later after you've seen The Mandalorian, because we will get into spoilers on Dark Side, Light Side later, a little bit later today. So keep your guys' eyes open for that. All right, question here then is, guys, did you have a chance to watch the first episode of Mandalorian? If so, how do you rate it? As a matter of fact, I decided to make that the topic of today's question of the day. And in today's question of the day, we simply asked you guys, we put this up just before the show started. Right now, a little over 1,000 of you guys have voted. Simple question was, how did you feel about the first episode of The Mandalorian? Right now, 65% of you are thinking it was great, 28% of you are saying it was okay, and 7% of you saying, you know what, it wasn't good enough for a first episode, and you're saying it wasn't quite good. So that's what you guys are saying right now. I'm going to leave that poll up for the next 24 hours, so go ahead over and vote on that if you guys would like. And yeah, guys, leave your thoughts below. What did you think of The Mandalorian?